The sound of a hospital at night isn't silence. It's the hum of electricity trying to keep death at bay. My daughter Maya lay in bed 4B, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical precision of a clock that's running out of time. They told me it was a mysterious respiratory collapse. They used words like idiopathic and spontaneous, expensive words used to camouflage a lack of answers. But I've lived 72 years, and I know that when a healthy 44-year-old woman drops in her own kitchen, the cause isn't usually a mystery. It's a motive. I sat in the corner chair, my spine a straight line of mahogany against the sterile plastic. My hands were folded over my handbag, not out of nervousness but out of stillness. People mistake stillness for frailty. They think a quiet old black woman is just part of the upholstery, a soft witness who has forgotten how to sharpen her eyes. They are consistently and often fatally wrong. Nurse Perez entered at 7:14 p.m. She didn't acknowledge me at first. She moved with a clipped, predatory efficiency, her white soft-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum. She was young, her skin pulled tight over a face that practiced empathy but couldn't quite achieve it. She checked the 4 bag, her fingers hovering over the port with a rhythm that wasn't clinical. It was possessive. "Still here, Mrs. Turner?" she asked. Her voice was a sugary glaze over a cold cake. "Visiting hours ended 20 minutes ago. The night shift is for professionals, not for family." I didn't blink. "A mother's vigil doesn't keep office hours, dear. I'm sure you understand the concept of duty." He stiffened. The mask of the caregiver didn't slip. It curdled. She walked over to Maya's bedside, pretending to adjust the pulse oximeter on my daughter's finger. Then she leaned over, her back blocking the view of the hallway camera. She didn't look at Maya. She looked at me. Her face was inches from mine. I could smell the sharp medicinal sting of peppermint on her breath, masking something sour. Her eyes weren't tired. They were vibrating with a strange, dark electricity. "You're a very observant woman, aren't you?" she whispered. The sweetness was gone. Now her voice was a razor blade wrapped in silk. "But you're looking at the wrong things. If you stay here tonight, you're going to see something you can't survive. Go home now, Mrs. Turner. While you still have a home to go to." She straightened her uniform, patted my hand with a touch that felt like a reptile's belly, and swept out of the room. The door hissed shut behind her. I didn't reach for the call button. I didn't scream for the doctor. I simply looked down at my handbag. Inside, tucked beneath my prayer book and my reading glasses, was a small leather-bound ledger I've kept for 40 years. It contains names, dates, and the many ways people think they've gotten away with being cruel. Nurse Perez thought she was clearing the room of a nuisance. She didn't realize she was inviting a predator into her playhouse. She thinks she owns the night shift because she has the keys to the medicine cabinet. She's forgotten that I have the keys to memories she hasn't even made yet. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. Because the mysterious illness in room 4B just found its cure. And the side effects for Nurse Perez are going to be permanent. The door didn't just close, it sealed. In a hospital, a closed door is a boundary between the living and those who are being negotiated for. I sat in the dim glow of the heart monitor, the green lines spiking and dipping, a neon ghost of my daughter's spirit. Nurse Perez thought she had dismissed a grandmother. She didn't realize she had just challenged a woman who spent 30 years auditing municipal contracts in a city that didn't want its books balanced. I don't look for the fire, I look for the person holding the match. I stood up, my joints popping like dry kindling. I didn't go to the door to follow her. Instead, I walked to the 4 stand. I didn't touch it, fingerprints are for amateurs, but I leaned in close. The bag was labeled saline solution, but the fluid had a microscopic shimmer to it, a subtle pearlescence that didn't belong in medical-grade salt water. I pulled a small clean tissue from my sleeve and dabbed a stray droplet from the edge of the Y-port where Perez's gloved fingers had lingered. I tucked it into a silver pillbox. "Maya," I whispered, leaning over my daughter. Her eyelids flickered, but her pupils were pinned, heavy sedation. "They think I'm the audience, baby. They don't know I'm the architect." I walked to the window. The hospital parking lot was a grid of cold lights and secrets. At 8:22 p.m., a silver sedan pulled into a restricted zone near the loading dock. A man stepped out. He didn't look like a doctor. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than a nurse's monthly salary, and he moved with the frantic energy of someone who was losing a game of chess. He met Perez by the side entrance. They didn't embrace. They traded something, a small padded envelope for a thumb drive. It was a transaction cold and clinical. I recognized him. Julian Evans. Maya's opposing counsel in the embezzlement suit she was set to litigate next week. The case involved millions missing from a healthcare pension fund. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening metallic sound. Maya wasn't sick, she was a bottleneck. She was a legal hurdle that needed to be paused, or removed. And Nurse Perez wasn't just a nurse. She was an independent contractor with a specialty in complications. I sat back down in my chair. Most people would run to the police, but I know how the police handle men like Julian Evans. They ask for statements, they follow protocols, and by the time they find the evidence, it's been incinerated in a hospital biohazard bin. To stop a snake, you don't call the gardener. You change the temperature of the room until the snake can't move. I pulled my phone from my bag. I didn't call 911. I called a man named Arthur, who has owed me a favor since 1994 when I cleared his brother's name of a crime he didn't commit. Arthur doesn't work for the city. Arthur works for the shadows. Arthur, I said, my voice barely a vibration in the room. I need the floor plans for the hospital's internal server room. And I need to know which pharmacy Perez uses when she isn't on the clock. Is it starting, Evelyn? He asked, his voice gravelly. It started the moment she touched my daughter, I replied. I looked at the clock. 9:05 p.m. The night shift is long, as the nurse said. But time is a relative thing. For Perez and Evans, the clock is ticking down. For me, I have all the time in the world to be patient. The nurse will be back in an hour for the final check. She expects to find a grieving woman. What she's going to find is a void where her future used to be. The hospital's air conditioning kicked into a higher gear at 10 p.m., a low mechanical growl that signaled the building was settling into its graveyard shift. I didn't blink. I've spent years in basement archives, tracing money that didn't want to be found. You learn that the loudest things in a room are often the ones trying the hardest to stay silent. My phone vibrated once. A single text from Arthur. Check your cloud. The blueprints are there. Perez's pharmacy isn't a pharmacy. It's a private lab in the Heights. Owned by a shell company, Evans Equity Partners. I looked at the screen, the light reflecting off my glasses. I didn't need a degree in biochemistry to understand the math. Nurse Perez wasn't just administering medicine. She was a field tester. Julian Evans wasn't just an embezzler. He was a silent partner in a pharmaceutical startup that was cutting corners on clinical trials. Maya had been about to expose the fraud in the pension fund, but she'd stumbled onto something much more lethal. A trail of bodies disguised as natural complications. I looked at Maya. Her skin had a translucent, waxy quality. They were using her as a live specimen to test the very drug she was trying to sue them for. The irony was a bitter pill, but I've always had a strong stomach. At 10:15 p.m. the door opened. It wasn't Perez. It was a young orderly, barely 20, pushing a cart of fresh linens. He looked tired, his eyes darting to the floor. He avoided looking at Maya. That was the first tell. People who are comfortable with their work look at the patients. People who are carrying a burden look at the ground. Excuse me, young man, I said. My voice was soft, maternal. The kind of voice that makes a person want to confess their sins to a stranger on a bus. He jumped, his hand gripping the cart. Oh, sorry, ma'am. Just swapping the sheets. It's a long night, I said, tilting my head. Must be hard seeing so many people come and go. Especially the ones who shouldn't be here in the first place. He froze. His knuckles turned white. I just do my job, ma'am. Of course you do, I replied, standing up slowly. I walked toward him, my movements deliberate. But your job isn't to look the other way when Nurse Perez enters the restricted med dispenser without a double sign-off. Your job isn't to ignore the fact that the security logs for this floor have a 5-minute gap every night at midnight. His breath hitched. He looked at me then and I saw the fear. Not of me but of what he was a part of. I have a family, he whispered. They pay well. I can't. Fear is a high-interest loan, son, I said, stepping into his space. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, old photograph. A picture of Maya when she passed the bar exam, beaming with pride. This is my daughter. He has a family too. And right now, her heart is being used as a stopwatch for a man who wouldn't stop to help you if you were bleeding out in the street. I let the silence hang between us. Silence is the best interrogator. It forces a man to listen to his own conscience. Midnight, he finally choked out. The server room in the basement. That's when the backup runs. That's the only time the internal encryption drops for 60 seconds. If you wanted to see what they're really doing, that's when the door unlocks. He practically fled the room, his cart rattling like a cage. I checked my watch. 10:42 p.m. Perez would be back soon for her rounds. She thought she had intimidated me into leaving. She expected the room to be empty, or at least occupied by a broken woman. I took the silver pillbox with the tainted sample and placed it inside a small, padded mailing envelope I'd prepared earlier. I addressed it to the state medical board, but I didn't plan on mailing it yet. That was my insurance. My weapon was something else entirely. I sat back down and closed my eyes. I wasn't sleeping. I was visualizing the path to the basement. I was counting the steps. I was becoming the ghost they thought I already was. The fluorescent lights in the hallway hummed at a frequency that felt like a migraine in the making. I've always believed that modern buildings have no soul. They are just containers for human desperation. By 11:30 p.m., the hospital had shifted into its most dangerous phase. The hour where fatigue makes doctors sloppy and overconfidence makes criminals bold. I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my wool coat. I leaned over Maya and pressed a kiss to her forehead. She was burning up, a fever that shouldn't have been there if she were just on saline. I didn't panic. Panic is a luxury for those who have something left to lose. I have already lost my husband to a clerical error in a VA hospital 20 years ago. I learned then that if you don't fight for your own, the system will bury them in a potter's field of paperwork. I walked to the door and peered through the small rectangular window. The hallway was empty, save for a distant janitor buffing the floors 3 wings away. I stepped out, my movements fluid and quiet. I didn't take the elevator. Elevators are boxes with cameras and weight sensors. I took the stairs. 7 flights down to the sub-basement. My knees ached, a rhythmic grinding that reminded me I was 72, but my mind was at a dead sprint. The sub-basement smelled of damp concrete and industrial coolant. This was the nervous system of the hospital. The server room where every dose, every heart rate and every accidental death was recorded in binary code. According to the orderly, the encryption dropped at midnight for the daily backup. A 60-second window. I reached the heavy steel door marked authorized personnel only. It was 11:58 p.m. I stood in the shadows of an oversized HVAC unit, watching the digital keypad. At exactly 12 a.m. the small red light on the reader flickered to amber. I slipped inside. The room was freezing, filled with the roar of cooling fans. Rows of black towers blinked with malevolent green lights. I didn't have much time. I pulled a small high-capacity flash drive from my pocket, another gift from Arthur, and plugged it into the main terminal's maintenance port. Accessing. The screen whispered. I navigated to the pharmacy logs for floor 4. I didn't look for Maya's name. I looked for the requisition codes. There it was. Compound X74. It wasn't a medication. It was an experimental neurosuppressant. And the prescribing physician wasn't a doctor at all. The digital signature was an encrypted bypass code belonging to Julian Evans's private laboratory. They weren't just testing on Maya. The logs showed 14 other respiratory failures in the last 6 months. All of them were elderly, all of them were uninsured or without family, and all of them had died quietly in the night shift. Maya was the first one with a mother who knew how to read a balance sheet. Downloading, the progress bar crawled. 40%, 60%. Suddenly the heavy door behind me creaked. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. I told you to go home, Mrs. Turner. Nurse Perez's voice was different now. The synthetic sweetness was gone, replaced by a flat, metallic resonance. She wasn't holding a tray or a chart. She was holding a preloaded syringe, the needle gleaming under the server lights like a tiny silver fong. You're a very difficult woman to manage, she said, stepping into the blue light of the monitors. Most people your age just fade away. Why can't you just let her go quietly? It would be so much easier for everyone. I turned slowly, my hand still resting on the flash drive. I looked her in the eye, not with fear but with the weary disappointment of a teacher watching a student fail a very simple test. You think this is about her life, I said softly. But you've forgotten whose blood is in her veins. You didn't just target a lawyer, Perez. You targeted my legacy. And I've spent 70 years protecting that. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Your legacy is about to end in a basement. No one knows you're here. In 5 minutes, I'll call security and tell them I found a confused old woman who wandered into the server room and had a cardiac event. It happens all the time. She stepped closer, the syringe poised. She was young, strong, and fast. I was none of those things. But she was playing a game of physical force. I was playing a game of consequences. You're right, I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. No one knows I'm here. But everyone is about to know what's on this drive. And if that syringe touches me, the encryption trigger I just set will broadcast these logs to every major news outlet in the state. Automatically. She froze. The needle was inches from my arm. You're bluffing, she hissed. Try me, I replied. I'm 72. I've lived through Jim Crow, 3 recessions, and a husband's funeral. Do you really think I'm afraid of a needle? The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the servers. We were 2 predators in a cage waiting for the other to blink. If you think I'm trying to save myself, you're missing the point. I'm not the one in danger here. Perez just doesn't know it yet. Nurse Perez's hand didn't shake, but her eyes did. It was a microscopic tremor. The look of a person who had spent her life manipulating the weak and suddenly found herself staring into an abyss that didn't blink back. The needle remained poised, a silver sliver of lethality between us. You're an old woman, she hissed, her voice dropping an octave into something primal. You're a glitch in a system that's already decided your daughter is a casualty. You think a few files on a thumb drive will stop Julian Evans? He owns the board of this hospital. He owns the lobbyists who write the laws you think will protect you. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the expression of a woman who has watched 1,000 men like Evans come and go, all of them thinking they were the protagonists of history. Julian Evans owns the system, I agreed, my voice a calm velvet. But he doesn't own the data. And the data doesn't care about his pedigree. It only cares about the truth. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the drive. I simply stood there, an anchor in the storm of her panic. If you kill me, I continued, the upload completes. If you let me walk out of here, the upload, well, that's up to how the rest of this night goes. You're a smart girl, Perez. You've worked hard to get into a position where you can decide who lives and who dies. Don't throw it away for a man who won't even remember your name when the subpoenas start flying. She looked at the server rack, then back at me. The logic was cold, and she was a creature of cold logic. She slowly lowered the syringe, the needle retracting into its plastic sheath with a faint, metallic snick. You think you've won, she whispered. But you're still in the basement. And Maya is still on floor 4. And I'm still the one who changes her bags. Then we understand each other, I said. I pulled the flash drive from the port. The light on the terminal turned from green to a steady, mocking red. I walked past her, my shoulder brushing hers. She smelled like antiseptic and fear. I didn't look back. I knew she wouldn't strike. A predator only attacks when it's sure of the kill, and Perez was no longer sure of anything. I took the stairs back up, my legs feeling like lead, but my heart beat with a steady, ancient rhythm. When I reached room 412, the air was different. The heavy, pressurized hum was still there, but the mysterious shimmer in the 4 bag was gone. A new nurse was there, a woman I hadn't seen before, older, with kind eyes and tired hands. She was checking Maya's vitals with a genuine focus that Perez lacked. The night shift just swapped, the woman said, smiling softly at me. Nurse Perez had a family emergency. I'm Nurse Miller. Your daughter's oxygen levels are actually starting to stabilize. I sat back down in my plastic chair. I didn't say anything. I just watched Maya's chest rise and fall. Perez hadn't fled because of a family emergency. She had fled because she realized that the old woman wasn't just a witness, she was a mirror. And she didn't like what she saw in the glass. But the night wasn't over. Perez was the symptoms. Julian Evans was the disease. And I've always been very thorough with my prescriptions. I pulled out my phone and sent one more message to Arthur. The sample is secured. The logs are downloaded. Now tell me where Julian Evans is hiding his private ledger. I want the one with the names of the people he's already erased. The response came 30 seconds later. He keeps it in a floor safe in his home office. But Evelyn, he's got a security detail that'll see you coming from a mile away. I looked at my daughter, her face pale but peaceful. They won't see me, I whispered to the empty room. They'll only see what they expect to see. And that's their first mistake. The hospital lobby was a cavern of echoes at 2 a.m. I walked through the sliding glass doors, the cold night air hitting my face like a splash of clarity. I didn't take a taxi. I didn't call a car service that could be tracked by a digital footprint. I walked 3 blocks to a 24-hour diner where Arthur was waiting in a booth that smelled of burnt coffee and old regrets. Arthur is a man who exists in the margins. He was once a high-level forensic accountant for the state, a man who could find a missing penny in a hurricane. Now he's just a ghost with a laptop and a long memory. You look like you've seen a ghost, Evelyn, he said, pushing a thick manila envelope across the Formica table. I've spent the night looking at one, I replied, sitting down. I didn't touch the coffee. I didn't have time for jitters. Did you find it? Evans is careful, Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. But men like him have a fatal flaw. They believe their own shadows can't talk. The ledger isn't in a safe. It's digital, hidden behind a biometric lock in his home office. But he's arrogant. He uses the same security firm for his house that he does for the hospital. The same encryption protocols. The same backdoors. I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs of a sprawling estate in the hills, guarded by a stone wall that shouted of old money and new secrets. But there was also a printed schematic of the security grid. He's hosting a charity gala tonight, Arthur continued. A fundraiser for his new medical research foundation. The irony is thick enough to choke on. The house will be full of the city's elite. He'll be too busy shaking hands to notice a ripple in the water. He won't notice me at all, I said. Because I'm not going as a guest. I'm going as the help. Arthur looked at me, a flicker of concern crossing his weathered face. Evelyn, this isn't a hospital hallway. These people have armed security. If they catch you... They won't catch me, I interrupted, my voice as cold as the wind outside. They'll see a black woman in a service uniform and their eyes will slide right over me. I've spent my life being invisible in rooms full of people like Julian Evans. It's the one gift the world gave me that I'm finally going to use. I stood up, taking the envelope. Keep an eye on Maya. If Perez tries to come back or if the emergency ends too soon, you know what to do. I know, Arthur said. But Evelyn, what's the end game? You have the files. You have the samples. You could go to the district attorney. I looked at him and for the first time that night, the anger I had been suppressing flickered in my eyes. The district attorney is on the guest list for tonight's gala, Arthur. Julian Evans doesn't just need to be arrested. He needs to be dismantled. I want him to watch his world evaporate, piece by piece, until he's standing in the center of his own wreckage. I walked out of the diner and into the dark. I had 4 hours before the sun came up, and a very specific uniform to acquire. The strategy was simple. Most people try to break into a house through the windows. I was going to walk through the front door with a tray of hors d'oeuvres and a heart full of calculated retribution. The Evans estate was a monument to stolen time. It sat atop the hill like a crown of cold limestone, illuminated by floodlights that bleached the grass a sickly, artificial green. At 8 p.m., the circular driveway was a parade of black town cars and German engineering. Men in tuxedos and women in silk armor stepped out, their laughter carrying over the manicured hedges, the sound of people who believe they are untouchable. I arrived in a white van marked Elite Catering. I wore the uniform of the invisible, a black polyester vest, a white collared shirt, and a pair of sensible shoes that didn't squeak. I carried a crate of vintage crystal flutes. The security guard at the service entrance checked my clipboard, his eyes barely lifting to my face. To him, I wasn't Evelyn Turner, a woman with a legacy and a Gree Turner. I was staff member number 14. Kitchen's through there, he muttered, gesturing with a thumb. Don't wander off the service path. Yes, sir, I replied, my voice a soft, obedient murmur. The kitchen was a controlled chaos of stainless steel and shouting chefs. I blended into the rhythm. I filled trays, I polished silver, and I moved with the practiced invisibility of a shadow. I watched the staff rotation. I watched the security detail. Men with earpieces who looked for threats in the crowd but ignored the woman clearing their empty champagne glasses. I waited for the moment. It came during the keynote speech. Julian Evans stood on a small dais in the grand ballroom, a microphone in his hand and a lie on his lips. He was talking about pioneering breakthroughs and the sanctity of human life. The audience applauded, their jewelry catching the light like 1,000 tiny, accusing eyes. I slipped away from the catering line. I didn't run. I walked with purpose, carrying a silver tray of appetizers as if I were looking for a specific guest. I moved through the library, past the conservatory and toward the east wing. His home office was guarded by a heavy oak door and a digital keypad, the same model I'd seen in the hospital's sub-basement. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. I pulled a small, translucent bypass strip from my pocket, another of Arthur's shadow tools, and slid it over the sensor. The light turned from red to a soft, inviting blue. The office smelled of expensive leather and old cigars. I didn't turn on the lights. I used the glow of my phone. I went straight to the desk. The biometric scanner sat there, a glowing glass square that required Evans's thumbprint. I didn't have his thumb, but I had something better. I pulled out a small, high-resolution transparency film I'd lifted from a champagne flute Evans had discarded earlier in the evening. I'd spent 20 minutes in the pantry carefully lifting the print with a forensic kit Arthur had provided. I laid the film over the scanner. Scanning. The computer whispered. Access denied. The screen flashed. My breath hitched. I repositioned the film, my fingers trembling slightly. I thought of Maya, gasping for air in a bed that was being turned into a coffin. I thought of the 14 others who didn't have anyone to stand in this room for them. Access granted. The screen bloomed into a directory of folders. I found the one marked Project X74. It wasn't just data. It was a ledger of bribes, a list of doctors on the payroll, and a spreadsheet of acceptable losses. I didn't just copy it. I initiated a remote mirror to the State Attorney General's private server. Suddenly the door behind me opened. The light from the hallway spilled in, casting a long, jagged shadow across the desk. "The shrimp puffs are excellent," a voice said. It was smooth, arrogant, and entirely too close. "But I don't believe we offer office service during the gala." I turned slowly. Julian Evans was leaning against the doorframe, a glass of scotch in his hand. He wasn't angry. He looked amused, the way a cat looks at a mouse that has climbed into its bowl. "You're the woman from the hospital," he said, stepping into the room. "Mrs. Turner. I must say, your persistence is almost as impressive as your wardrobe change." "Persistence is a trait of the righteous, Mr. Evans," I said, my hand resting firmly on the desk behind me. "Righteousness is a luxury for people who can afford the legal fees," he retorted, taking a sip of his drink. "You've made a very brave, very stupid mistake. You're in my home on my private server. Even if you have something, you've obtained it illegally. It'll never see a courtroom. And you won't be around to testify." He reached for his pocket, likely for his phone to call security. "I'm not here for a courtroom, Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "I'm here for the audit." The progress bar on the screen reached 100%. A chime echoed in the quiet room. "What was that?" he asked, his smile faltering. "That," I said, stepping away from the desk, "was the sound of your legacy evaporating. You think you're the only one who knows how to use a night shift." The air in the office grew cold, though the heating was humming at a steady 72 degrees. Julian Evans set his scotch on a mahogany side table, the amber liquid trembling slightly. He looked at the computer screen, then at me. His arrogance was a suit of armor that was beginning to rust in real time. "You think a file transfer changes the world?" Evans asked, his voice regaining its sharp edge. "I have friends in every office that matters. By tomorrow morning, that server will be wiped for maintenance. You're playing checkers in a stadium built for gods." I adjusted my catering vest. I felt remarkably light. "I'm not playing checkers, Julian. I'm an auditor. And an auditor doesn't just look at the books, she looks at the people who keep them." I stepped toward the window, looking out at the gala. The friends he spoke of were down there, sipping his champagne, unaware that the ship was already under the water. "That wasn't a transfer to the Attorney General's office," I said, my voice a calm, rhythmic pulse. "I lied. I sent those files to the one group of people you can't buy, intimidate, or disappear." Evans's brow furrowed. "Who?" "The families," I replied. The 14 families of the complications you buried in the sub-basement logs. I sent them the raw data, the internal memos calling their loved ones acceptable losses, and your private home address. And I BCC'd the lead investigative reporter at the Chronicle. Evans's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. You crazy old woman. You've incited a riot. You've ruined everything. No, I said, walking toward the door. I've balanced the ledger. You spent your life treating people like numbers. Now those numbers have names. And they're coming to collect the interest. I didn't wait for his security. I didn't wait for his threats. I walked out of the office and back through the gala. I passed the district attorney who was laughing at a joke near the fountain. I passed the CEO of the hospital who was checking his gold watch. They didn't see me. I was just the help clearing the way for the inevitable. I walked out the front door this time. No one stopped me. The valet even held the door of the catering van. By 4 a.m., I was back in room 412. The sun was a bruised purple on the horizon. Maya's eyes were open. They were clear. She couldn't speak through the oxygen mask yet, but she squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong. The grip of a woman who had a lot of work left to do. On the small television suspended from the ceiling, the news ticker was scrolling frantically. Breaking. Scandal erupts at Evans Equity Partners. Leaked documents allege illegal clinical trials. Protests forming outside CEO Julian Evans's estate. There was no mention of a grandmother in a catering vest. There was no mention of a silver pillbox or a midnight trip to the basement. I leaned over and whispered into Maya's ear. The night shift is over, baby. We're going home soon. I sat back in my plastic chair and closed my eyes. The silence in the hospital finally felt like peace. I had spent my life being quiet, being patient, and being invisible. People think that's a weakness. They don't realize that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice or the biggest bank account. It's the one who knows how to wait. Julian Evans thought he was the architect of his own destiny. He forgot that every building needs a foundation. And I've always been very good at finding the cracks. Thank you for watching Old School Payback. If you enjoyed this story of calculated justice, hit the like button and subscribe to ensure you never miss a lesson in accountability. Do you think the families will show Julian the same mercy he showed their loved ones? Let me know in the comments below.